My name is Maniza Naqvi, and this is the 19th episode of the Little Book Company podcast. My guest in conversation for this podcast is Shehan Karunatilaka, whose powerful and satirical novel, The Seven Moons of Maali, Almeida, won the Booker Prize in 2022. It's about many things, but centers around a photographer in the afterlife who sets out to expose the carnage of Sri Lanka's civil wars. And we'll talk more about that. His earlier debut novel, Chinaman, The Legend of Pradeep Mathew, about a cricketer, a star Sri Lankan all-rounder who's disappeared, won the Commonwealth Book Prize, the DSC Prize, the Gratiaen Prize, and was judged the second greatest cricket book of all time by Wisden. Welcome, Shehan.
Thanks, Maniza. Thanks.
So when we just started the podcast, you told me you were playing cricket with your son.
Yes, that's my daily, afternoon after I finish writing. It's just, no, what I was telling you was, I think the last time we met was in Karachi during March, if I'm not mistaken. And that was coming off about 4 months of just constant touring. And there was, another 6 months of less than constant, but there's a lot of touring last year. And so, I'm kind of grateful since March. I've just been back at home, waking up in the morning, reading, writing, playing cricket with the kids, back to my normal boring life. And it's pretty wonderful because the last year was wonderful in its own way, but I did miss the simple things of, playing cricket in the backyard and waking up early and just having to read books and write a few sentences and as opposed to get behind microphones and do interviews like this and which has been my reality for the last year. So my son's turning out all right. He can read my googly and my leg spin, so I need to now work a bit harder. Yeah.
So did you secretly want to become a cricketer, a professional cricketer at any point?
Yeah, I think that cliche adolescent male fantasy, yes, at least South Asian. We certainly had it when I was growing up in the 80s. Mainly looking at Pakistani cricketers, actually, looking at, Imran Khan, Abdul Qadir. We aspired to be bowlers like that. But then, of course, Sri Lanka won the World Cup when I was in my 20s. But by then, I'd given up my cricketing ambitions. But I think as a youngster, we all had that fantasy of playing cricket for Sri Lanka.
Either playing cricket or marrying a cricketer, I would say.
Marrying, would that be fun? I'm not sure that'd be fun. Who knows? Who knows?
Wouldn't.
There's different types of cricketers.
Yeah. So, since you didn't become a cricketer, what did you go on to do before your writing career?
Well, it's not like the cricket dream was ever alive. I took 4 wickets in under 13. That was the extent of I dropped a lot of catches as well. So I think, I, like most, 18, 19-year-olds, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And most of my 20s also, another adolescent male fantasy, I played bass in a few noisy rock bands. And so after none of those things had worked out, I ended up being a copywriter in advertising agency. So, I felt like I was at least earning a living from writing, and it was the one career I could still grow my hair long and go to work in a t-shirt. And then I guess I had an idea about cricket, about being a great cricketer, even though I failed to be one myself. And that wouldn't leave me alone, as I think many writers feel that. It's not like stories just won't leave you alone until they are written. And so wrote Chinaman, that was 15 years ago. And it's been like a test innings. It's been a slow progress since then. But then suddenly, last over, there were a lot of sixers. And last year, there was a big prize and then a lot of attention after that. So I guess I ended up being a writer. Maybe I'll write about being a failed rock star or something. But at least writing you can continue into your old age. I think cricket and noisy music less is much a young person's game.
And is it true that a draft novel of yours that wasn't even published won an award as well?
No, that's not true. It's when Michael Ondaatje won the the Booker Prize in '92 for English Patient. He was Sri Lankan born, and families from Sri Lanka has great ties here. So he set up this thing called the Gratiaen Prize, which is just entering its, I think it just celebrated 30 years, and I saw the new shortlist is out. And so basically, that really kickstarted this boom in Sri Lankan writing in English. Um, and so I remember, sorry, I lost the thread, Maniza. It's late in the day. What were you asking about?
Said I thought that even an unpublished novel of yours had won an award.
Ah, right, correct. Sorry. So Michael Ondaatje's Gratian Prize. So that allowed you to submit manuscripts, and it encouraged a lot of us to write. And I submitted a lot of manuscripts. We didn't even get long listed until finally Chinaman, the unpublished manuscript, got shortlisted and then eventually won. But no, I think you're referring to my first ever attempt. It was a book called The Painter.
Yes.
I think I wrote it when I was 23 years old. It was lucky to get shortlisted. I don't think it deserved to win anything, and yeah, rightfully didn't. It was a pretty terrible adolescent, immature little novel. I put it away. I don't think it'll be seeing the light of day. But yeah, it was encouraging at least. Maybe there was something in the writing that let the judges shortlist it. But no, that one was down to youthful mistakes. I put it aside.
And winning the Booker Prize, it sounds like last year was just a touring year of, just as you said, speeches and microphones. Is that
Yeah.
that take away from your time? I mean, obviously, doesn't it, from writing?
Yes, I mean, that's the big irony of this thing. Like, when you choose to be a writer, you choose to sort of sit in a room, dark room in my case, by yourself, not talking to anyone for most of the day. You're talking to yourself, or I mean, it's a wonderful thing, but it attracts a certain type of personality. And then once you achieve a bit of success or receive some success, then you're expected to perform, which is not a natural place for a writer. I mean, even in my band days, I wanted to be a bass player. I never wanted to be a front man or lead guitarist or drummer, maybe drummer and bass player. So I think that was what's strange. So then right after you win the prize, there's basically a week of just solid back-to-back press with all the big news agencies, and then yeah, that never stops. So I think that's the thing you get used to, but also, you know, you can't grumble about it because you write in anonymity hoping that one day one of the books will become famous and will be read. So when that happens, you have to appreciate it and enjoy it, but it is unnatural. I think Karachi, I had to do the keynote speech there, and it's I much prefer, taking 25 drafts and 25 weeks to write something when you have to write something and perform it immediately. It's strange. But, that's a small price to pay because suddenly, the book is now translated into many languages and it's read around the world. And I've traveled very far with this book. My last appearance was in Sweden at the Umeå Festival. That was like a few weeks ago. And so, you got to appreciate that writing in Colombo, this story about this war that the rest of the world doesn't even remember, and then to have it travel. I mean, that's the power of a big prize. So yeah, look, I knew that I'll have to give up a year of my life. And that's what they tell you. The Booker people, the previous winners, they say basically, you're not going to write for the next year, but, enjoy yourself, make the most of it. Or not. You don't have to. No one's forcing you to get on stage. If you want, you can be a recluse as well. But, I made the most of the opportunities and all that, but it is quite exhausting. And so, yeah, I am quite glad to be back writing. I'm starting a third novel, and yeah, it's hard work and it's fun work. And yeah, I'd much rather do that than perform the
Is
films.
there
Yeah.
anything you can tell us about the new novel, or you'd rather not speak about it and talk to us about the Seven Moons of Maali Almeida bit?
Yeah, it's we all know it's bad luck to talk about stuff you haven't written yet because you end up not writing it. So better to write it, and we'll talk about it in a few years. Hopefully it won't take too long.
All right.
But yeah, happy to talk about the stuff that's been published. Yeah.
Yes, so let's talk about your Booker Prize winning novel, The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida. So it is about the civil wars and the terrible, wars that Sri Lanka went through. but you have this
Mm.
wonderful style of satire and gentleness, I think, but at the same time, creating a pretty dark story. That's quite a talent.
Yeah, so I think it was just I didn't, you do spend a lot of time on the voice. But I didn't intend, like I didn't sit there saying how do I make it funny, how do, because this is you're researching this quite dark period in our history. But also any Sri Lankan story comes with its share of absurdity. And I think the narrative voice that I chose for both books, they are both kind of characters in bleak situations, but they all have this gallows sense of humor.
Mhm.
W.G. Karunatilaka in Chinaman, who's drinking himself to death, but
Mhm.
all he can think about is the greatest cricketer he ever saw, and he just wants to keep drinking and keep watching cricket until he drops dead. And Maali Almeida, who's already dead and has 7 days to solve his own murder, and also just sees the absurdity in the conflicts, in the various agendas, the different parties that are involved in these various conflicts, and their conflicts of interests, and all that. So I think humor, anyway. I mean, I've spoken about this many times about Sri Lanka's relationship with humor, where even though we've had a grim history,
Mhm.
we like to, the memes never stop, even during the height of the economic collapse of 2022 when the book won the prize and people on the streets protesting and presidents fleeing and all, and petrol queues and all that, there were jokes. And I think that's maybe the Sri Lankan sensibility, how we deal with things we're powerless to combat, and also the fact we've lived in this dystopia for most of our generations, for most of our life, and since independence. And so I think that that's where it came from, but also it made it easier for me to enter into these subjects because these were pretty depressing topics and pretty shameful pages of our history. And so, therefore, to have some, at least a sardonic, sarcastic way of looking at it, which is what Maali Almeida gave me, um, that allowed it to be at least enjoyable to write. And hopefully, it made it more accessible to read. Because I think if I'd written a serious tale about 1989, about Sri Lanka's ethnic conflict, the Marxist insurrection, and the government death squads, might have been heavy going to read, certainly would have been tough to write. So I think that's where it came from. Just following characters. And Sri Lankans, there's plenty of characters in this place, if nothing else. There's plenty of stories, there's plenty of characters, as you know, as is true of the rest of the subcontinent. Um, so, I mean, I guess
I
even though life can be challenging in our part of the world, it's good for writing dystopian novels about, I suppose.
Yes, when you're in our part of the world, it seems like everything is definitely wilder and more dystopian than fiction that you've read, right? So
Mm.
it does feel that way. But the way it seems to me, just listening to you, that humor uh, might be the only way to survive just terrible, traumatic. Uh, uh, Carnage, history of that sort. That humor isn't always just a ha 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 moment, but a way to survive.
Mm. And yeah, it's that does come a point, and I was quite wary when I was editing this and revising, which again did multiple times, especially over COVID towards the end. And you're also aware that there is a point where the jokes have to stop, where when the novel goes into some pretty horrific places. It goes to photographs of atrocities, but also a torture chamber in a torture building in the middle of Colombo. And when it goes there, yeah, you have to look at it quite soberly. But you can't get away from the absurdity of people who were enemies before are now allies, and or everything starting with a worthy cause, but then how the movement gets out of hand and becomes the thing it hates. And all these ironies are right there in history. So I think Mali Almeida and a few of the other ghosts have a very, yeah, humorous, but humor sounds like it's making light of it. It's certainly not doing that, but it is seeing the absurdity and the stupidity of a lot of these violent acts.
Right. The absurdity, the stupidity, just the sheer waste of it.
Hmm.
Yeah. But reading your work, I feel like if you were facing a terrible bully, Shehan, you would pretend to be drunk and tell him such an intelligent joke in which he was the butt of it and wouldn't know it.
That's very nice. I mean, that's a great compliment. I did have to deal with bullies in high school, but yeah, I wasn't armed with the humor or the one-liners then. Yeah, but so I'll take that one. Um,
Yeah, yeah. So tell me a little bit about Colombo. Do you have a lot of bookstores in Colombo?
yes, Colombo. Yeah, it's been through many transformations in the last 5 years, since pre-COVID to, and so it was. I think there was a period 2015 to I think before the Easter attacks where things were thriving. And yeah, there were a lot of book chains, yeah, Vijayapa and Sarasavi and Barefoot, some of which are still in business.
Mm-hmm.
But also great second-hand bookshops. Near Maradana, you have these street side bookshops where you're going to get real gems, um, going second-hand. But yeah, quite a big reading culture,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of lit fests. One I right after the economic crisis, yeah, three lit fests happened, bang, 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 and
Which which
yeah,
are
so I think at
the
both
one in
sides,
Gaul?
the Gaul Lit Fest, and then there was the Ceylon Lit Fest, which took place in Kandy and Colombo,
Mm-hmm.
and then there was one in Matara, which is more kind of arts festival,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's Colombo Scope in Colombo, which is yeah, more of art festival. Um, but yeah, it went through when you look at 2022 where there was nothing. There was certainly no books coming in, and this is around the time I was getting long listed and shortlisted, and no one had read the book. But obviously there were bigger things to worry about: no petrol, no gas, and people on the streets. But it's miraculous you come today within 1.5 years, and it's like, yeah, what crisis ever happened? Even though the poor are struggling, a vast majority of people are struggling. If you look superficially, the lights are on, and if you came in December during the season, yeah, the tourists have piled back in.
Mm-hmm.
People are spending money in restaurants and all of that. So Colombo goes through very quick cycles. Who knows? We might miss another debt payment and we'll be back to wasteland dystopia this time next year.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, yeah, the bookshops are, I think Vijayapa, there's less outlets now. I think was hard hit by COVID, but yeah, there's still quite a few. And Barefoot Bookshop is always doing well. And but what I've noticed, a lot of book clubs, because I get invited to every single one now, and I obviously can't say yes to every one, but there seems to be a lot of interest. But we're just talking about Sri Lankan writing in English. Sinhala literature, and to a lesser extent Tamil literature, have much bigger followings and bigger readerships. And when you go to the Colombo Book Fair happens in September, and you go there, yeah, Sinhala writers here get mobbed, and so hopefully that's a ray of hope. I always say that if we can have a nation of readers,
Mm-hmm.
even a generation away, then maybe half of these mistakes and these absurdities and stupidities won't happen. So these are encouraging signs.
Have your novels been translated to Sinhala and Tamil?
Yeah, it just came out in Sinhala in January, so
Mm-hmm.
it's yeah been out for a few months. So I think it's done pretty well, and the reviews. I don't read as many reviews these days, but yeah, if there was a terrible one, it gets sent to me. So I haven't got anything sent to me yet. So that's encouraging. The Tamil version comes out. I'm hoping in June. That's what we last heard, that it was being edited. So this year there will be um, versions of Maali, Almeida in both languages, and I'm very proud of that. I mean, even though it's been published in Estonian, in Turkish, and in Greek, and all of that, which is wonderful. To have it out in Sinhala and Tamil is a great thing.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. And what can you tell me a little bit about what Sinhala writers are writing about, or Tamil writers in Sri Lanka? What are they writing about?
Well, this is the thing. Now, we work in silos. I could tell you plenty of what's the diasporic writing in English, what English writers in Kandy and Gaul and so on. Sinhala writers, I'd have to, if we were doing this print-wise, I'd have to Google it and give you a considered response because, yeah, we work in our own silos. I and so I as far as Tamil writing is concerned, I mean, I get sent a few again diasporic writing, but in the Tamil language. So we're getting a few stories coming out of the war or the post-war experience and that.
Mm-hmm.
But single writers, it is vast. You have as far as I know, you have comedies, sort of crime, a lot of crime, sort of teddy dramas. These books get made into TV films, but yeah, kind of hard-boiled crime narratives. But also, yeah, a lot of political writing, there's been a long tradition of sort of Marxist writing or class-based writing. But as you can see, I'm just faffing here because I should be able to give you, okay, these are 5 writers you should be reading. But really, we live in our
Yes.
own little silos, which I think I mean, I've raised this, and I think the only way we can combat it is more writing in translation.
Yes.
So not just English books being translated into those languages, but the great Sinhala literature and Tamil being translated, but also people like me making the effort to read in the other languages, which I don't do enough of. I can read newspapers and magazines, but it's been a long time since I've read a novel, and I'm taking Tamil lessons now. Hopefully, in a few years, I'll be competent enough to read a simple novel.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I see this as a big deficiency. And if you talk to most other writers in English,
Yes.
no, well, not all of them, not all of them. So some are a lot more well-rounded than myself.
Well,
but
I
mostly
think of one
we live in
from my country.
Sorry?
I can only think of one person from my country actually who's great in both language, and that's Muhammad Hanif.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. And
yeah.
but yeah, I'd like to give you a better informed answer to that. But I do know that there are books coming out, and the publishing industry. Maybe there's also a bit of sort of mutual. Well, I won't say distrust, but the idea is kind of English writers, get most of the attention because the English books get sent for the prizes and all of that and get reviewed internationally. And so, yeah, I think more work and even the publishing industry. We have local publishers in Sri Lanka, but like the rest of the subcontinent, the big international publishers are in India, right? So if you want to, get published internationally, you need a publisher in India. So let's see how this situation evolves. But at least the good thing is Sri Lankans are writing, and that's evidence just in what you see online, as well as what you see in the bookshops. And there's plenty to write about. So I think that's an encouraging sign.
And in terms of the economic situation that you just spoke about, what do you make of this, that it's so dire suddenly, and then suddenly everything is okay? What do you make of that?
Yeah, so I don't the mysteries of international finance and financing. Yeah, I've tried to understand it. I've tried to talk to people who know about it. But from what I understand is we were completely bankrupt, couldn't pay back our loans, and now we borrowed more money to pay off those loans. And so we're propped up by, more loans to now. I think, the IMF has come in, and so it looks fine. Yeah, it looks now there's water in the taps and petrol in the pumps, so we think everything's okay. But the cost of living has continued to. I mean, it skyrocketed right at the time. I think it's coming under control. But I think, to my layman's understanding, in order to build an economy in the medium to long term, you need to start making stuff or creating value and all of that. I'm not sure we're seeing much of that. I think we're just been propped up by more loans. But hopefully this money that comes in, one, it can go to the people who need it the most and not disappear to the usual channels. I mean, that's most of our hope, that it finds its way to the poor who are struggling. And we have reports of families having to skip meals and decide which ones go to school. And I think we have an election coming up, and that'll be quite telling. Because with Sri Lanka, it really depends who you ask. You talk to someone in Colombo, they'll be like, "Yeah, things are back to normal, and we're now going to be we're going to be Singapore in 5 years." And there's that absurd optimism you hear.
So
And then, but
stand in line, because I thought Pakistan was going to be Singapore in 4 years.
oh, everyone's going to be Singapore. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
City state in 5 years' time. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So the Singapore thing gets touted a lot, and I think, look, yeah, no disrespect to Pakistan, but it's a huge country with huge problems, and Sri Lanka is a tiny country with huge problems. But we 20 million people. I'm sure Elon Musk could pull out his small change and bail the country out. But it's not just sticking money and these visions. You have to change. And I think again, Pakistan and Sri Lanka suffer from the same inefficiencies, the same corruptions, the same entitlements, and causes of disharmony. I mean, different causes of disharmony, but the same net result. And those are the things that hold us back.
Yeah.
And but we live through it, and then the cricket team does well, and everything's forgotten, and we're united, and this cycle keeps going. But let's see. Like I say, it depends who you are. I maybe, if you've read my writings, I err on the maybe slightly more cynical, nihilistic side of thinking. There are much greater optimists than me in Sri Lanka, and hopefully they are making positive steps to building it something for the long term.
Well, you have the huge population. By huge, I mean, the majority of the population in Sri Lanka is educated. That's a big win right there, isn't it true? And then the remittances that come into Sri Lanka, that's also a huge positive. That isn't because of aid money, that's Sri Lankans. And then you have the tourism. And what else do you want to produce?
There's lots going for it, that's for sure. Yeah, look, if you look at agriculture or fisheries or I think we can sit here, two writers, and solve our economic problems over a cup of tea. But the fact is, we're not even self-sufficient in food. We import most of our food. And tourism certainly, and foreign remittances. Yeah, I'm not going to even attempt that. But what you said, it's mostly going to work as domestic servants and those kind of jobs. I mean, it'd be nice if we were importing
the country,
importing professionals. Educating our workforce. And you're right, it is educated, but make them more competitive, and so we are exporting real talent in whatever IT, nursing, or teaching, or so there's plenty of plans and plenty of armchair philosophers like us. But I think Sri Lanka small enough that it is curable in a generation, and maybe that's the optimism that we have. Suddenly, it's always the case with our cricket team as well. Even though the cricket team will lose and lose, suddenly they'll produce a blinding performance, and then everyone will be like, forget all the corruption, all the inefficiencies. We have the natural talent, and optimism comes back. So these are the kind of absurdities that's fun to write about, but when you've lived with them for decades, it gets a bit tiresome.
Yeah.
But let me not be a downer. I think Sri Lanka's 2024 looking a lot better than it was in 2022. In cricket as well as in all other aspects. So let's see where we can. There's a crucial election this year, as there is in many parts of the world. So that could be quite decisive. But then again, you change the personalities, you have to change the entire way of thinking. And I mean, a system change is the buzzword that happened during the Aragalaya, during the struggle, calling for system change. What that exactly meant, who knows, you get 100 different answers.
Mhm.
But
What did that mean for you?
anyway, our job is just to sit and write about this stuff and then yeah, grumble about it in private. I think that's we're not big on the solutions business, but hopefully someone is.
Yeah,
Hopefully,
I
writer
agree.
people. Yeah.
So, Shehan, why we'll take a small pause here and come right
Hmm.
back.
Sure.
Okay, all right. So, Shehan, I love the way you open your novel in a tax office with the ghosts asking for rebates.
Hmm.
What made you think of that?
Sorry, there's a little. Is there a lag on the recording?
Is there?
Um. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
you're going to cut this together now. No, there was a bit of a lag, but okay, maybe it's better now.
Is it better
Yeah.
now?
Sorry. So you're asking about tax rebate
Yeah,
thing.
that it
Um.
starts in a tax office with ghosts, with your characters asking for a tax rebate. Everybody's
Yeah,
there.
that's right.
Mhm. What made you think of a tax office as a setting?
So I think it started with again problem solving. So I when you make a decision that a ghost is going to tell the story and tell the story of their death, I had to figure out what does the afterlife look like? What does at least a Sri Lankan afterlife look like? And I tried the usual ways of researching, reading the religious texts and what philosophers have to say, what, horror movies, ghost stories, speculative fiction. I went to, from Dante to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I went to different places. And I couldn't quite, I think, I tried different, the afterlife as an asylum, the afterlife as the world as a cemetery. I tried different tropes. But in the end, when I realized that afterlife would be as disorganized as a Sri Lankan tax office or visa office.
Mhm.
I realized that was a great opening scene. I knew that much. I didn't know the details of it, but it made sense also that why should we all believe that the afterlife is where all the answers are revealed, right? You open your eyes after you die, and then everything makes sense. Your life, the universe, God, your place in it, which is, comforting. But for me, the Sri Lankan afterlife seemed more like a confusing place, like a visa office where you wake up, you got a piece of paper which in your hand, which you got to get stamped. The guy's gone to lunch, and you have 7 days to make sense of your life and make peace with your loved ones and solve your own murder. And that chaos, it was good for a thriller because I was basically at the heart of it. The book is a murder mystery,
Mhm.
except the corpse is the detective. The dead guy is solving their own murder beyond the grave. And so that idea of confusion, and we all relate to it. We've all experienced varying types of bureaucracy, but especially in Southeast Asia.
Mhm.
And that for me, it's later. I knew it was a good opening scene and I wrote it. And then as the book evolved, I realized that confusion may explain the Sri Lankan, our history. There are many explanations why this beautiful paradise has been cursed with conflict and disorder. And one explanation could be that there are all these ghosts of our past who are waiting for their visa to be stamped so they can move on to the next realm. But they are, the bureaucracy is so disorganized that they are wandering around whispering bad thoughts in people's ears, um, you know,
Mhm.
messing things up. And these restless ghosts of our past is the reason why Sri Lanka is full of conflict. So once I knew that, I thought, okay, this is a rich enough idea.
Mhm.
Then I had to set about constructing the rules because I think any speculative or however you want to call it, science fiction or fantasy story or magical realist, if you're using these surreal elements, you still need to have some consistency or some logic to it.
Mhm.
So so you have 7 days to solve your murder or make peace with your death before you move and walk towards the light. And there are certain rules, like you can go wherever your name is spoken, you can go wherever your body has been, and you can't really talk to humans. except in dreams and all that. So I had to construct all these things and at least set them up at the beginning. So that's why the tax office, it explains the rules of engagement. So therefore, sorry, when you come to the solution of the book, it's not a big surprise how things, because all the tools have been given. But yeah, I just came to it that way. I just thought a Sri Lankan afterlife is going to be just as confusing as a Sri Lankan bureaucracy. So why not try that idea? So the idea is, yeah, God is not, there are these philosophical, is God absent or is God indifferent or malevolent? It's no, God is everything you want God to be, but just he or she is just very disorganized. And that's the problem. But they mean well, but they're just badly organized and they've delegated to bad people. And that's why we're in the mess we're in.
Mm-hmm.
It was a possible explanation. Yeah.
And 7 moons, that takes from the religious ritual that, right?
So that's part of Sri Lankan folklore, though I have seen it in other parts of South Asia, is 7 days. So after the death, we believe that the spirit hovers around for 7 days. And on the seventh day, we have a blessing or an almsgiving, or a priest comes and says a sermon. And so we have an event on the seventh day, and we have an event on the 3-month almsgiving. So that's after 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of our culture. But it just made, I thought, okay, so if you are a spirit, you have 7 days in which to sort things out. If you miss that bus, you have 90 days. If you miss that, who knows? You're doomed to roam this earth for eternity. Who knows? But it was a useful framing device. It borrows from folklore, but also I was very mindful that I was writing a murder mystery, and therefore there are rules with that. You have the corpse, you have the suspects, and you have the ticking clock and 7 moons. So even though the book rambles like I do and goes all over the place, the reader knew you're getting closer to the solution with each moon that passes. But yeah, it came from Sri Lanka.
Well, actually, you don't ramble at all. You're very...
Are you sure? I'm not sure that's true, but okay, you're very kind.
And even though I've actually... I can't recall entirely your keynote speech at the Karachi Literature Festival. I was very moved by it. And I don't know if it was a rehashing of the 20 speeches you had given in the months before giving that speech, but it was beautifully written and just as nicely delivered.
Oh, thank you, thank you. No, the Karachi's, I mean, there is an element of rehashing, but each place is very unique, and especially with how it relates to the books. And Karachi was one of the first, so I think that was a fresh speech. I also don't recall much, but I do recall lots of parallels between our countries and what was happening at the time. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
And the other thing about you that I actually really value is that your humility there, Shehan. You seem to be staying out of the limelight, or you always seem to choose to, when you did attend any session, you sat somewhere in the back. Even just before the keynote speech, you were sitting somewhere in the back. And I'm sure that people around you were quite surprised when you got up to give the keynote speech. Which is not really a big trait that we have, I think, in South Asia or in Pakistan. Humility does not come easily to us.
Is that true?
Well, at least it
yeah,
is for my
I don't know. I've always been used to, as most writers are, turning up to parties and, walking straight to the bar and waiting in the corner of the room, observing people. That's usually been my practice for most of my life. Now it's a bit strange because now actually people want to talk to you. Before, no one wanted to talk to this hairy guy sitting by the bar, but now, yeah. So now it's a bit hard to be at things. But also, I think writing is a it's a humbling, okay, you get the accolades and all of that, it's wonderful. But then when you get back to writing, which I'm experiencing right at this moment, when I'm back to writing the third book, it's hard work and it's quite a humbling experience. If you thought, no matter how many awards or how many books you've sold and all that, I think it doesn't get any easier. So I think it's good to kind of stay grounded and just make the work famous. You don't have to be famous, but the books, make the books good and make sure they are read.
Right.
Um,
Make it a
yeah. Anyway,
mm-hmm.
also, like I said, writers are slightly different from directors. You see it in cinema. No one knows the writer's name. No one cares about the writer. It's always about the star and the director and all of that. The screenwriter just gets a small credit.
Yes.
But of course, for them, the whole joy was in creating the story out of nothing and seeing it. So that's its own reward, really. Um, but yeah, look, I'm only two books and one prize. I think maybe after a few books, I might get a bit more arrogant, and you'll see a different me. But for now, I'm gonna keep it simple. Yeah, until I write a few more books. Yeah.
I wonder what the authors of the 19th century would have made of all these awards that are handed out now.
19th century. It was a completely different game then. Awards. So it's strange because I come from advertising, and advertising is another profession that loves to give itself awards. Maybe second to the film industry. And the professions that really deserve awards, like nurses and teachers and proper people who are doing actually productive stuff, never get the awards. But actors and writers do. Um, it's it's a strange thing because I've obviously benefited from awards, but you are also aware that it's a huge lottery and there's a lot of luck involved, and you just keep writing and try and ensure that you're of a standard that you get considered in these things. But there is a lot of awards, but I guess that's because there's a lot of books. There's literally thousands of books coming out, and there's strange, hard to categorize each one and make sure each one's a bestseller. And so these awards, act as the gatekeeper and curate options for readers.
I think,
but yeah, there are a lot of them. There are a lot of them. What
yes,
do you make of them?
no, I think that they do curate books for readers, and they make really good choices. Um, and present company is no exception to that. That the choices that the booker makes are phenomenal. I think they're wonderful, and so I don't have an issue with that. Maybe I've spent too much time in this podcast with you talking about your award when I should have been talking about your writing process and when was the first time you wrote, and I stayed away from that deliberately because I'm sure you're sick and tired of being asked about your writing process.
No. What do you want to know?
Well, you've already told us you sit in a dark room, which I find a little odd to write.
Well,
Why a dark room?
it's got fancy lights. I've got these smart lighting things, so I can turn the lights blue or green or depending on the mood. But generally, not a lot of things to distract me. And the main thing is it's a job like anything else. Like you just have to get into a routine, and I'm still not quite in that routine yet. But when I'm, really in the throes of a story and writing it, I'm waking up at 4 in the morning usually, 6 days a week. And to wake up at 4 in the morning, you have to go to bed at like a decent, probably 8 or 9. You can't be watching Netflix till 1 in the morning and expect to write the next day. So I think getting into that routine. But when I'm there, and from 4 to 7 before the kids wake up is when most of the books get written. Those 3 hours are quite magical and quiet, and also there's power in the repetition. So I make sure every day, I read for a couple of hours, write for a couple of hours, even though even, regardless of whether it's good writing or bad writing, I clock in and yeah, I get to play cricket with the kids in the afternoon. And that's a good day for me. And as long as you string those, as many of those days together,
Mm-hmm.
hundreds, thousands, then you'll have something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really it. I mean, there's no big mystical. Everyone's got their quirks, Some may light candles or have funny lights or play a certain type of music or
Do you think?
have some ritual, but that's all irrelevant. I think the main thing is you're at work every day and at the same time, and if today is a bad day, you turn up the next day and you hope for better. But yeah, I think that's pretty much been it. Just turning up. So that's what's hard when you're on the road and doing lots of publicity to get into that zone
Mm-hmm.
where you're living in the world of the novel.
Mm-hmm.
But no, nothing else that mystical. I use pencils and paper and write longhand and then type it up.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
But sorry, I laughed, but I think writing longhand makes a difference. And it has, to me, that somehow, uh, maybe because I grew up writing by hand and the kids now don't, but um, just a better connection to your brain or your heart. And the writing seems more poetic or lyrical when handwritten.
yeah. No, I think pencil to paper is the quickest way to but I guess the kids would disagree. Now kids are probably writing on their devices and all of that. So I guess it's whatever you're used to. But yeah, I find I make very rough notes by hand. It's not finished prose or anything like that. But then when there's enough of it, then I'm ready to type.
Yeah.
Um,
So that just reminds of something I wanted to ask you, Shehan, because this is something that's really worrying me. What do you think about all this chat GPT and AI that's coming up with novels and writing and does that bother you?
yes. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm no expert on AI. There are many who claim to be experts on it. I don't think anyone knows where it's heading, but there are, uh, you know, obviously there are great advantages to this technology in, beyond the arts in other fields. I'm not too worried about it in the sense that I've tried ChatGPT, I've tried some of these things. I've entered how do you follow up a Booker-winning novel? Give me 30 ideas, and yeah, I asked for 100 ideas. I didn't. Some of them were interesting, but it's still in its basic stages. Um, what I do think is it's going to get better, and what will happen is I guess more people will become writers because back in the day, not that long ago, to be a photographer meant you had a specialized skill and specialized equipment, and you had to have a red room and film and lenses and all that. Then after the smartphone, everyone's a photographer now. Now
Mhm.
anyone, with a decent iPhone can claim to be a photographer, and I think if you century back to when photography first appeared,
Mhm.
um, a lot of portrait painters, landscape painters, illustrators were like, we're going to be out of a job. They're going to ruin painting because these guys can now take portraits in an instant as opposed to months or years. But in the end, what happened was initially there would have been some disruption, but now there are more photographers employed and painters employed than there were during that time. And painting itself evolved. It went from realistic drawing to impressionism and surrealism and all of that. So I think for me, it's like we don't know where it's going to be in 10 years, but more people will become writers and this will become another tool that we use. So instead of me spending 7 years writing the seven moons, maybe I can knock it out in 7 weeks, which will be great, right?
Would it?
Um, maybe, who knows? But I think also the very good writers will have to be a step ahead of the machine because the machine can only recreate patterns. So perhaps formulaic stuff like certain types of crime fiction or romance or like books with formulas can be replicated.
Mm.
But I think the real good writers will have to do stuff that the computers wouldn't have thought of. Like, I don't know if a computer would have come up with Lincoln in the Bardo. You needed a human imagination to do that. So I think we'll be okay. In 100 years, yeah, everyone will be writing novels in like 2 weeks. But the very good will be creating classics. So I think it's fine. And I think, look, you and me will be good for a couple more books before the robots take over. So I think we're okay.
Okay. But do you,
But
but that's good to know. But I can just hear the difference between, well, in just the personality type between yourself and me. I'm looking at doom and gloom, and you can just cut through it and still see, how everything's going to be okay. And that's
well, I
that's
think
quite
so.
remarkable.
I'm not always convinced everything's going to be okay, but technology is always disrupted. I mean, you think about you go through the last 2 centuries. We didn't have electricity 300 years ago, and then suddenly, the telegraph, the railroad, all these things were disruptive at the time, and people freaked out, and then we just normalized them. So yeah, just because we can't see where it'll be, I think it'll be fine.
Do you,
If anything, there'll just be more stories, and
or do you think
yeah.
there'll be many more notebooks where people will go back to writing by hand because they don't want the artificial intelligence to keep on stealing their ideas?
That's a possibility, and we've seen that. We have, we live in a time where, it would have been amazing for us as kids, right? Your whole record collection can sit in your pocket. Now we take it for granted, but what an innovation that was. But now people have always been going back to records and vinyl and having that tactile thing. So, and same with books. There was many commentators talking about the end of books, that the Kindle and our devices, audiobooks and all that will replace everything and books will be done. But we've seen that it hasn't been the case. Audiobooks do really well. People read on the Kindle, but physical books are still selling as well.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
I think, the things that disrupt, we don't expect at all. That's the thing. We can commentate and, try and be Nostradamus, but suddenly, overnight, newspapers stop being relevant.
Well,
Actually, it didn't happen overnight. It happened very, very slowly. But
well,
um,
yes. I mean, the New York Times became irrelevant because you got TikTok and Twitter giving us, news in real time rather than one side's narrative. So yes.
yeah. So now this Aragal, during 2022, during the struggle, I was in Iowa at the Writers International Writing Program.
Mhm.
Suffering severe anxiety because back home things were just going crazy. And again, my first sources were those two you described, TikTok and what was called Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter. Um, those were because those would tell you what was happening on the ground,
Mhm.
as opposed to the traditional news sources, which would take a day or two to compile a report, in which case most stuff was done.
Mhm.
But yes, that's been disrupted. Music, back in the day, you'd go to a record shop and drop a couple of $100 and walk out with CDs or records. Now for $10 a month, you get all the music in the world, and these things have. So who knows where writing and storytelling is going to evolve into?
Mhm.
Um,
Well,
but I think all we can do is adapt. You
yes.
can't fight it, you can't ban it. And I suspect it's still going to be hard. It's still going to be hard to come up with, a great story that moves someone
Mhm.
across the world. I think it's still a tough job. Yeah.
I think that you put your finger right on it. That's it. You can write stories, but if they don't move you, well, then that's not really anything. And it's those,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so the machines can replicate the formulaic things. And there are formulas to fiction writing. There are certain tropes and techniques that we use. But I think, yeah, the rhythm of the prose, the beating heart of the character and all of that, perhaps you still need a human to do that.
Don't say
Um,
perhaps. Don't say
Well, we know.
But Shehan, I keep on writing the stories that move us. And thank you so much for talking with me today. I know that it's now evening in Colombo, and the day is just getting started here in New York. Thank you so much. What are you going to do now after this podcast before we go?
I should go to the gym. That's what I should do. I should exercise because I've written and I've played cricket, but who knows? Who knows? But yeah, I got to be in bed by 9, and it's a school night. So yeah, probably just getting the kids ready for school, I think. And I might go for a walk. But yeah, nothing too crazy.
All right. Well, have a good evening, Shehan, and thank you so much. And good luck with the writing. I can't wait to read your next novel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maniza.
All right.
Great chatting as always. Yes.
And hope to see you soon.
Yes.
All right. Bye for now.
Okay. See you soon. Bye-bye. Bye.